The death toll in the Kenyan attack rises to 21 as neighboring countries beef up security. The UN to investigate the DRC's intercommunal ethnic violence massacre. And Uganda ready to take in more refugees despite the Ebola outbreak concerns. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program. Public services ground to a halt in Tunisia as the union's leaders strike, demanding a better pay. And big names return to Banyana squad ahead of a friendly tie against the Netherlands. Let's start in Kenya, where the death toll from Tuesday's attack on a hotel in Nairobi has risen to 21. This follows the discovery of 6 bodies in the Dusit D2 hotel and office complex on Wednesday evening during a search and rescue exercise. Now, while announcing this, Kenya's police boss also said among them was a police officer who succumbed to his injuries while undergoing treatment in a local hospital. Meanwhile, the Kenya Red Cross Society says up to 19 people are still missing. Elsewhere, the first funerals of some of the victims of the attack were held in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, on Wednesday.
It is now the third horrific situation that we are enduring. We cannot endure more than this. When our youth are being killed, when our children are actually being terrible, they cannot even go to school. And it is now the mandate of the government to protect us. And if it cannot protect us, let it give us weapons. We go and fight with the enemies.
Earlier, we spoke to retired Brigadier General Mohammed Ahmed, a security expert, on why Kenya is susceptible to Al-Shabaab attacks and what needs to be done.
Al-Shabaab in Somalia is not doing very well. They have been degraded. They have lost territory. They have lost that military power. They have lost. They have no financial base right now, and all this is very alarming for them. And they have gone down. And indeed, for almost some time now, there has been no major attack in Kenya, only in Somalia. What's happening now, certainly, is that they're trying to reaffirm that we are around. Just saying, don't brush us off. We are around, we are still strong, take note. That's the key message they're trying to pass right now, a psychological war to the Kenyans. The financial gain should not drive us to do what we are doing. We've always said this, that is a major weakness for Kenyans. Where the dollar is, they'll go for it in this total disregard of security. So Kenyans must take this on. Don't just search for the dollar. Find out, is it good money? Is it clean money? Is it safe for me? And is it safe for my neighbor? And then go in that. Something, we talk about corruption, weapons coming in, crossing almost 300 kilometers, all the way to Nairobi, through our territory. That must concern somebody. We have forces along the way. We have individuals, we have security and all that. Somebody must see this and say, well, I've seen this. I can assure you, there are Kenyans who will see somebody carrying a weapon, moving in their direction, and they feel this dangerous, and they don't report it. Partly because they see also, reporting to the police, they fear. I want to assure them that the face of the police is also changing. They are very much now responsive to our reporting and all that. We must work together, both as population and security, to ensure we provide that 100% security for our population.
Meanwhile, Kenya's neighbor Uganda is on high alert after the terror attack in Nairobi. Police there say that security has been enhanced and counter-terror measures put in place to secure the East African nation. For more on this, I'm now joined from Kampala by CGTN's Isabel Nakiria, and Abdulaziz Bilo is joining us from Mogadishu. Let's start with you, Isabel, in Kampala. Uganda police have issued a terror alert following the attack in Nairobi. Can you give us more details on this? What's going on?
The government of Uganda acknowledges the fact that they've been victims before. You remember in 2010 July, Uganda was attacked by Al-Shabaab and over 70 people died. So this just reaffirms their commitment in tackling terrorism. The army says they are on standby and ready to retaliate any attacks if there are any. The police also says the anti-terror squad has been alerted, and they are high on alert at the borders, all entry points, and this is just to make sure that any any terrorists or wrong elements do not gain entry into its borders. The army says there is no threat at the moment, but this does not mean they should not raise their security level, being the fact that in the past they've been attacked before.
Abdulaziz, Somalia has suffered a series of attacks by the militants in the recent past. Given the attack in Kenya, how worried is Somalia at the moment?
Well, Beatrice, one thing that has caught many by surprise here in Somalia is the fact that militant group Al-Shabaab had the audacity to carry out such kind of attack the way it carries out here in Mogadishu. In this context, Al-Shabaab here in Somalia, they normally disguise themselves as members of security forces wearing police uniform, and sometimes they've even carried out an attack disguised as members of the African Union peacekeeping troops known as AMISOM. So the fact that they disguise themselves probably as hotel guards to launch that attack there in Kenya is one reason that caught many by surprise here in Somalia. And coming back to your question, Somalia has suffered a lot in terms of terrorism. For the past 11 years, Al-Shabaab has maimed and killed thousands of Somalis here in Somalia and also in areas outside of Mogadishu. So the militant group has been known to stage such kind of deadly attacks, but the one thing that has been learned from the attacks in Kenya here in Somalia is Al-Shabaab will at all times try to get media attention and attack and cause huge damage in terms of attacks. So in this case, authorities here have beefed up security because Al-Shabaab carried out that large-scale attack in Kenya. But then again, despite all the mechanisms that authorities and African Union troops have constantly put up here, Al-Shabaab has always found an avenue to carry out devastating attacks on high-end hotels, including high-value installations, including the airport, the presidential palace and the country's parliament. And one reason that analysts say is a key contributor to Al-Shabaab's courage to carry out these kind of attacks is the fact that they've been challenged by African Union troops for almost 11 years, but still they find a way of carrying out deadly attacks.
Isabel, Al-Shabaab has constantly warned Uganda that it would launch attacks in the country, yet the group has not been able to live up to that threat, at least not in the last 9 years. So what lessons can Kenya and Somalia draw from Uganda's situation?
I think since the last attack in 2010, the security forces here have consistently been on high alert, both at the entry points, that is at the border and at the airports. And we also know that there has been consistent community policing. So the communities in Kampala, all over the place, have consistently been taught what terrorism is and have been told to report any suspicious people that enter into a community. For instance, the Somali community here lives in one specific area of Kampala. And together with the police, they have gotten deeply in touch with this community, and the leadership of this community has registered all members of the Somali community in Kampala. And every new person that comes into that community must be known. And that is how the police here has managed to always raid terror cells in the city. That happened sometime back last year towards November, September, when a terror cell was raided in that community, Kisenyi, and some people who were suspected to be terrorists were arrested. And this is just because the Somali community there reported this kind of activity to the forces, and the forces were able to swing in. And so the communities here are always alert and reporting everything.
Right, Abdulaziz, a final comment from you, though. It almost seems that no matter how many times authorities call out Al-Shabaab, they somehow find a way to pull off an attack and keep the fight going. Why is this?
Well, Beatrice, that's a very good question. When we look at the events that happened the last 2 months, U.S. drone strikes here pushed militants out of rural villages in areas near Mogadishu and also in central Somalia. So experts are saying that the reason as to why Al-Shabaab is carrying out such kind of attacks in Kenya, for instance, is to show the world that despite increased military operations in Somalia by the United States and African Union troops, as well as the Somali government, that they can still strike at will, not just in Somalia, but in areas of interest like Kenya in this case. So one thing that experts are saying is the fact that there was a new publication the other day saying that US drones will be reduced because they have been very effective in reducing Al-Shabaab's threat. So this is seen as a retaliatory move by Al-Shabaab to show the United States that it was wrong. It miscalculated the operations in Somalia, and Al-Shabaab can still attack areas that are of good interest to the United States, in this case Kenya. So one other thing also to note is Al-Shabaab, they're very, very strategic in carrying out their attacks, and this attack in Kenya coincided exactly on the eve of Kenya's anniversary of the first deadliest attack on Kenyan troops in Somalia, El Ade. It happened in 2015, January the 15th. So Al-Shabaab used that exact moment when Kenyans were mourning still the loss of their loved ones in that attack in 2015, and they used it to carry out that attack. So Al-Shabaab at all time will try to do that, and also the latest reports that are being shown by Washington that to prove that there's still a lethal threat.
Abdulaziz Bello joining us there from Mogadishu, and Isabel Nakiria in Kampala. To you both, thank you. The United Nations has launched investigations into a massacre that it says killed almost 900 people in the Democratic Republic of Congo in December. The UNHCR spokesperson Ravina Shamdasani says approximately 890 people were killed in the December 16th to the 18th massacre, where violent clashes between the Banunu and Batende communities took place in 4 villages in Yumbi territory in Mai-Ndombe province. Most of the area's population has reportedly been displaced. The UN further says that the displaced residents included some 16,000 people who sought refuge by crossing the river into neighboring Republic of Congo, also known as Congo-Brazzaville.
Now I have to emphasize that 890 is the number of people that we know were actually buried. But there are reports that many others may have been killed and their bodies may have been dumped in the Congo River, or they may have been burned to death.
Let's get more on this now, and I'm joined on the line by Chris Ochamringa. He's in Kinshasa for us. Chris, some very shocking revelations there by the United Nations, citing credible sources. What more can you tell us about this, and what is the government saying?
Well, it is shocking information indeed. Now, this conflict between the Banunu and Batende is a long-standing one over a piece of land, disputed piece of land in Yumbi territory. Now, when the incident happened last December, the government said that they recorded 100 deaths, and it was that was the reason that they postponed the election in that particular area. Now, the government has said that they still maintain that they only know of 100 deaths. They are also expressing shock at the UN's figures. I spoke to the head of the UN Human Rights Office in Kinshasa late last year, about the process of carrying out these investigations. And he said that they have a very rigorous process whereby they ask very many locals, some of the leaders in those areas, and they have a way of confirming the anecdotal evidence that they have gathered. So from what they're saying, they're citing credible information. It looks like the figures are much more than the 100 that we were told last year.
Chris, on the political front, though, the DRC recently held an election. What's the latest on the disputed election?
Well, the matter is before the Constitutional Court. The second runner-up, Martin Fayulu, filed a petition challenging the result that declared Felix Tshisekedi the winner. And on Tuesday, the court started hearing the arguments from both sides, and they're expected to deliver their verdict tomorrow. They're expecting the Constitutional Court judges to make their ruling.
Chris Ochamringa on the line there from Kinshasa. In the meantime, though, in Uganda, the country says it is prepared to take in another 75,000 refugees from the Democratic Republic of Congo, despite concerns that the Ebola virus could spread to the country. The latest upsurge of refugees from the DRC comes as the African Union is discussing durable solutions to forced displacement in Africa. CGTN's Isabel Nakiria reports.
It's a struggle to make ends meet. As for refugees like Grace Asio, she says she will keep income coming in from her farm produce and only return to South Sudan if she's sure the war is over. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala.
And we still have more news for you here on the program. To stay with us.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Police in Sudan have fired tear gas at anti-government protesters in the eastern city of Kassala as demonstrations against President Omar al-Bashir's three-decade rule entered its fourth week. Various protest organizers continue to make calls for more demonstrations in different parts and times. Protests initially erupted due to the high cost of living, but have quickly taken a political angle. Now, the process of delisting Sudan as a state sponsor of terrorism by the United States is in jeopardy following a crackdown on protests in the country. The Troika countries, which includes the United States, have warned Sudan that it risks damaging engagement efforts over its response to the protesters. Khartoum is resisting what it calls this veiled threat from Washington. Daniel Wrenches reports.
With protests in Sudan continuing, doubts are emerging among experts in Washington about the second phase of a US process to take Sudan off a list of state sponsors of terrorism. In order to get off the list, Sudan's been told to fulfill a set of very broadly stated requirements, including enhancing human rights protections and practices.
There are no benchmarks or no criteria, so there's really no way certainly for the public, and I don't know how the US government would assess that Sudan actually makes some kind of progress in those areas.
The Troika group of nations, comprising the UK, Norway and the United States, along with Canada, issued a statement warning Sudan that its response to the protests will take months and years. Some foreign policy experts are still backing the US strategy, despite concerns about how the Sudanese government's handling protests in the country.
The likelihood of improvements in human rights in the Sudan is greater with the US engaging than with it sitting on the sidelines.
Among other delisting requirements for Sudan is expanding counterterrorism cooperation in a country where the US operates a sizable CIA base. The US State Department is refusing comment on Sudan for now as it struggles with the partial US government shutdown. Diplomats here have avoided imposing a timeline for Sudan, so the US could adopt a wait-and-see approach. For Sudan, delisting would ease its financial crisis, opening up lending support from institutions like the International Monetary Fund and providing a green light for foreign investors. Daniel Wrenches, CGTN, Washington.
Well, let's go to the United Kingdom, where there's some relief after a historic defeat. Prime Minister Theresa May has survived a no-confidence vote one day after her Brexit deal was rejected by British lawmakers. CGTN's Richard Bestick has more.
Another day of battle, but the UK Parliament finally gave its backing to Prime Minister Theresa May.
306, the noes to the left, 325.
A majority of 19, enough to keep the British Premier in place. To crunch votes in 24 hours behind her, May immediately made clear she'd plough on.
I believe it is my duty to deliver on the British people's instruction to leave the European Union, and I intend to do so.
The debate was at times fractious, following the overwhelming vote against Theresa May's withdrawal agreement the night before.
There can be no doubt that this is indeed a zombie government.
Brexit forms an unremitting background noise in Britain, some waiting in hope for the clock to be turned back.
We should stay, I think we should stay. So, Europe, we are the UK, and we want to stay. Stop Brexit! Woo!
Many viewed the motion of no confidence against May more in sorrow than anger.
It was a necessary first step to get out of the mess, but whether Parliament can find a way through, that's another question.
Brexit means different things to different people, and there's no clear way forward for any one type of Brexit.
None of it makes very much sense, and we're all just sitting kind of feeling frightened and uncertain.
So Theresa May survives to fight another day, but the rain clouds haven't lifted entirely. On Monday she's got to come back to this place and present a Plan B, an alternative to the EU withdrawal agreement that was so roundly rejected by members of Parliament. And she's already identified the main problem facing her. There's nobody in that building that can agree on the best form for Brexit. Richard Bestick, CGTN, London.
The International Criminal Court on Wednesday halted the release of former Côte d'Ivoire President Laurent Gbagbo following a fresh appeal by prosecutors a day after he was acquitted of crimes against humanity. Judges had earlier ordered Gbagbo to be freed after clearing him of any role in a wave of post-electoral violence in 2010-2011 that killed 3,000 people. The trial judges on Wednesday rejected a bid by the prosecution to keep the former leader in detention pending an overall appeal against the decision to acquit them. Here's the rest of that story.
To supporters of former Côte d'Ivoire President Laurent Gbagbo and his co-accused Charles Blé, the judge's decision was a welcome move.
This is the end of one phase and the beginning of another one. And we are really, as a daughter, I'm proud of my father, but also as a citizen of Côte d'Ivoire, I am so proud of my nation right now.
But with the Wednesday turn of events, the celebrations were short-lived. Prosecutors appealed the ruling, which led to the halting of their release. In their ruling, the ICC judges said Gbagbo had given the court enough assurance that he would return before the court if and when ordered to. But opponents of Gbagbo are already showing their displeasure over the court's ruling. Protesters took to the streets of Abidjan to express their dissatisfaction. To some, this reminded them of the pain they suffered during the post-election violence that rocked the West African nation between 2010 and 2011.
I lost my teeth because of the protests, because of Gbagbo's camp. I can't accept that Gbagbo and Blé have been freed. Let them stay there.
We're here to protest and show anger to the whole world that we are against everything the ICC has said. Either the ICC is supporting Gbagbo in his crimes or they are with us. We don't understand any of this. Gbagbo cannot be freed this way.
Gbagbo has spent more than 7 years in custody as he battles 4 counts of crimes against humanity over the conflict. He is accused of murder, rape, persecution and other inhumane acts. Noel Makugu, CGTN.
Meanwhile, the United Nations Security Council has expressed impatience over delays in the full implementation of Mali's peace process. Frustrated by security concerns and the lack of significant progress, France has threatened to seek further targeted sanctions against Mali. The US said it could push to change the UN's peacekeeping mandate there. Our UN correspondent Li Ling Tang has details from New York.
The Security Council on Wednesday saw frustration, disappointment and impatience over the lack of momentum in implementing Mali's peace agreement. That agreement was reached in 2015 among feuding sides in the West African country to end a conflict now in its 6th year. France said it is ready to propose new sanctions if expectations are not met. And the U.S. warned that Washington could push to modify the mandate of the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali, known as MINUSMA, if significant progress is not made. The warnings come at the end of a 3-month UN assessment that saw 2 peacekeepers and 3 MINUSMA contractors killed in attacks that also wounded dozens of people. Intercommunal violence in central Mali has also intensified. In one attack on January 1st, government officials said at least 37 villagers were killed.
As I witnessed during my visit to Gao and Mopti, the security situation remains of grave concern and a major challenge to the implementation of the peace agreement. Asymmetric attacks continue to target peacekeepers, national and international forces, and increasingly civilians.
But the Security Council did welcome some encouraging steps on the security and political fronts. They included the launch of a program to disarm, demobilize and reintegrate combatants, as well as the setup of interim district-level administrations in the north of the country.
Today, I'm happy to say that the government and the signatory movements are now a single Malian party, which speaks with one voice and which has decided to make peace for the benefit of our people, tested by 6 years of a multidimensional crisis.
There's a push to address shortcomings in security reform and holding a constitutional referendum. Now, the Security Council is also reportedly planning to visit Mali in March so that members can assess the situation for themselves and consider next steps. Leelingtown, CGTN, New York.
Now, it's just a month before the general elections in Nigeria. Many parts of the country are in campaign mode as politicians try to persuade people to vote for them. In exactly 30 days, Nigerians will choose a new president to rule them for the next 4 years. Here's CGTN's Phil Ihaza.
Posters and billboards dominate the landscape in Abuja and across the country as political parties try to influence Nigerians ahead of the polls on February 16th.
It's exactly 30 days to the much-anticipated presidential and senatorial elections in Nigeria. Tens of millions of voters will be heading to the polls to carry out their civic responsibilities and elect the country's leaders in what is largely expected to be the most fiercely contested election.
President Muhammadu Buhari is seeking re-election after returning to power in 2015. Then and now, he's running on promises of improving security, anti-corruption and the economy. Nigeria's economy slipped into recession in 2016, but returned to growth after Buhari implemented a recovery plan. But in early 2018, Nigeria became the country with the largest number of people in extreme poverty, according to Brooklyn's analysis of public data. Nigeria fell 12 places in the Transparency International corruption ranking for 2017.
We need a credible Nigerian who will emerge as a president that will make some of these our institutions like education to work very well. We will need a leader that will bring us out from this level of poverty.
So as a Nigerian, I hope this upcoming election will provide much job employment for the youths, for the graduates, because we have so many graduates on the ground still scouting for jobs.
The best candidate should win, candidate who can deliver the promises that they have made to the masses so that we can have the full impact of the government.
The Independent National Electoral Commission says the number of eligible voters has increased by over 6 million to 84 million since the last election, with 90% collecting their permanent voter cards so far.
The Nigerian people are excited and they're ready, and we've never seen this level of preparedness towards an election. In 2019, Nigerian people now understand the power of their permanent voters card, because this is a card that shows equity and justice.
President Buhari of the ruling All Progressives Congress has promised the country will conduct the freest, fairest and most credible elections in the history of the country. His main opponent from the People's Democratic Party is Atiku Abubakar, the country's former vice president. They joined 72 other presidential aspirants. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Public services ground to a halt in Tunisia as unions lead a strike demanding a better pay. And Zimbabwean travelers stranded in South Africa after 2 days of protests against fuel hikes.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Tunisia's General Labour Union UGTT has called for a nationwide strike after failed negotiations with the government on new salary increases in the country's public sector. The North African state is currently under pressure from the IMF to freeze the public sector wages as part of reforms to help reduce the country's budget deficit. Here's Adnan Chauchi with more from Tunis.
The Tunisian Labour Union is going ahead with a planned general strike across the country after failed negotiations with the government on new salary increases in the public sector. At least 3,000 people have gathered near the Labour Union's main headquarters in downtown Tunis. They were addressed by the UGTT Secretary General, Nourdine Taboubi. Taboubi said the government failed to provide basic needs for its citizens. He warned against what he described as an unprecedented social and economic crisis. The UGTT leader accused the Prime Minister and his cabinet of incompetence. The unionists said the level of poverty among Tunisians has increased in the past few years. The purchasing power plunged and costs of basic needs such as food, housing, energy and social services is beyond reach too many.
بعد ما رفض قيمة الزيادات اللي اقترحتها الحكومة.
The Premier regretted the decision by the General Labour Union UGTT to continue with the general strike, saying that the government has done its best to avoid it. Al-Shahid added that it is an unfortunate strike because it will have a high cost, especially in view of the economic situation facing the country. The Prime Minister said the government's efforts to reach an agreement failed despite presenting new proposals to the union. The proposals were aimed at improving the purchasing power of citizens and taking into account the state budget and the available resources. Al-Shahid argued that the proposed increases by the unions will negatively affect the workers and retirees. The state might be unable to afford pay salaries and pensions in the coming months. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Scores of passengers traveling to Zimbabwe from South Africa are stranded in the country's capital, Johannesburg. This follows the current unrest in Zimbabwe over President Emmerson Mnangagwa's decision to hike fuel prices in the country. The crisis has caused regional bus lines to cancel all their services into the southern African state. Banks, schools and businesses have also been shut down in the country's capital of Harare and Bulawayo. Several people have been killed while others have been arrested in the country since the protests began on Monday.
We were supposed to go to Harare, Zimbabwe now. We are coming from Port Elizabeth, but we can't proceed because they are saying things are tough. The buses are being banned and the roads are blocked. It's total shutdown. So as for today, we have to sleep here in Joburg.
It's a big problem to my family because now I don't even know how they can survive. Because to send money to them, you can't send. There's no money in the banks.
And following those chaotic protests in Zimbabwe, South Africa's International Cross-Border Traders Association has issued an advisory. It has cautioned all its members to avoid Zimbabwean borders and unnecessary movements. The association says it has also withdrawn all buses traveling to different parts of Zimbabwe as protests spread in the country. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has more.
The neighboring Zimbabwe has been in turmoil since the fuel price more than doubled unexpectedly. The International Cross-Border Traders Association is concerned for the safety of those who are traveling to Zimbabwe or intend doing so.
It's not safe for travelers to make any trips into Zimbabwe and out of Zimbabwe. The situation is very, very bad, as we have seen some police vehicles being banned. We have seen vehicle inspection directorate offices being banned. We have also seen some protesters shot. My concern is the safety of the people. If people are not safe, then it means we are nothing. People first, and then everything comes later. And also we are advising the government of Zimbabwe to make sure that everyone is safe in Zimbabwe. There should be no deaths. There should be no casualties in the country. Innocent people should not be killed.
Juru says his association has also withdrawn all buses traveling to different parts of Zimbabwe from neighboring countries due to the prevailing situation in that country.
A number of on imports, it's not exporting anything. So if we highly depend on those traders who are coming in and going out. So if we say they are being they are told to stay away, then it's a sorry state. It's not going to help the country.
South Africa has a large number of Zimbabweans residing here. They're watching the unfolding situation with deep concern.
The situation has reached a calamitous end. You know, we have expected that with a government that has just come into power, it is quite expected that they should be doing things to the benefit of the people. But what we see now is that the government is not interested in benefiting the people.
To have a strike there is better because maybe they think they can change everything. The matter will come all right.
I must be worried, man. You know, things they are not going okay. Everything is like it's chaotic, you know.
The International Cross-Border Traders Association is currently assessing the situation and will advise when it is safe for travelers to embark on their cross-border trips. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Eni, a major Italian oil company, has recorded an overall investment over $13 billion in Egypt since 2015. This emerged during a meeting between Eni's delegation and the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi in Cairo. The CEO of the company, Claudio Descalzi, affirmed that the firm is still looking forward to increases in its investments in the North African state. In 2018, Egypt's natural gas consumption increased in local productions. Egypt has developed major gas fields across the Mediterranean, and it aims to become a regional gas hub across the continent. Nigeria now, and we take a look at the country's growing list of farmers taking on soil-less technologies to increase yield and meet a surging domestic demand for food. Nigeria's government recently waived taxes on all inputs to encourage more farmers to invest in hydroponic farms. Take a look.
Samson Ogbole is a biochemistry graduate who grows yam tubers without soil in Oyo State in southwest Nigeria. All he needs is a controlled environment where young tubers are regularly sprayed with nutrients-rich mist by a process known as aeroponics. Samson has been growing yams like this for about 4 years now. He says the output per acreage is about tenfold compared to conventional farming. He spends a tiny fraction on fertilizers and water, and he is able to completely eliminate costs on herbicides. Yams are widely eaten across Nigeria, but ability of farmers to keep pace with demand has come under severe constraint.
We have so many things mitigating against farmers, such as there is low level of nutrients available for the farmer. There is also the fact that we have tribal clashes from one place to another. Then you have the Boko Haram crisis, and all of these has ensured that farmers are not able to farm in so many of these villages.
Which is why this giant hydroponic plant was created some 85 kilometers north of the capital, Abuja. The owners are investing some 1 million euros to make this the most ambitious hydroponic project ever undertaken in Nigeria. So far, it sits on 1 hectare, but there is a plan to expand it to 16 hectares.
the idea is not only about the soil losing value and then the population growing, so there could be land grabbing and so on. No, it's about productivity. We have to take into cognizance Nigeria is growing at an average population of 3.7. Give it 30 years from here, we're looking at about 400 million people. How do you feed them?
About 70% of Nigeria's population is dependent on farming, but modern techniques are out of reach for most of them. Most of them cannot afford it even after the government has waived off taxes on hydroponic inputs.
It's still very expensive for an ordinary farmer. So I think Nigeria needs to create a further incentive to support, and a few things could be done, either a direct negotiation by producers of these technologies, or try to find in create more enablers for investors that are not thinking about this today in Nigeria, that have the capital to go into this, to venture into investing in this area.
Nigeria's government has been encouraging local food production to offset its exorbitant import bill, but those efforts are yet to bear fruit. On average, the country spends around $11.2 billion yearly on importation of essential food items. Terry Wangare, CGTN.
And stay with us here on Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. African diplomats visit China's Reform and Opening Up exhibition.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
China's progress in 40 years of reform and opening up has sent positive ripple effects worldwide. Just months removed from a major forum rich with China-Africa cooperation, diplomats from several African countries viewed an exhibition in Beijing. CGTN's Mark Fontes has more.
Historical images and videos, old articles, sand table models, 4 decades of China's reform and opening up are chronicled in diversified exhibits. Many are amateur photos added to the interactive experience to feel big changes through the years.
It is really amazing that in 40 years such achievement was done. And if you look to the figures of the GDP, I mean from 1979, 97 up to now, it's really amazing. And China now being the second largest economy in the world.
More than 700 million Chinese have been lifted out of poverty, of which it has really contributed to the development of the world and to the Millennium Development Goals.
You know, the progress made in all sectors of the economy, in agriculture, in health, in education, in science and technology, you know, in diplomacy, you can see that Chinese people have really made tremendous, unprecedented progress within a short period of only 40 years.
And China is attracting even more eyes from around the world thanks to its growth, especially those from developing and emerging economies. Some of them expect to benefit from China's experience and the blueprint of building a community with shared future.
We want to learn how they did it in order to copy the same. It's not copying, but to benefit from the way they did these things here in our continent as well.
Through discussions, through dialogues, and through identification of different projects according to the need of Africans. I'm quite sure that with the support from the Chinese side, we are going to make a step ahead on various areas of development projects.
Some visitors also say it's connectivity that brings Africa closer to China through cooperation and initiatives. With China inspiring other countries' development, many hope that Africa and China will forge a diversified win-win cooperation in the future. Mark Fontes, CGTN.
1,000 Chinese living in Zimbabwe attended the gala at the University of Zimbabwe to celebrate the upcoming Chinese New Year of the Pig. Acting Chinese ambassador to Zimbabwe, Xiao Baogang, praised the Chinese community for their hard working and perseverance in the year 2018. Organizers from the Chinese community also called on the local Chinese residents to also support efforts promoting bilateral ties. Guests enjoyed the Chinese cuisine in an atmosphere with traditional Chinese music.
Looking back on 2018, we have experienced the uneasiness brought about by the general elections, as well as the ups and downs brought about by the economic situation. Everyone present here is a witness and participant in the development of Zimbabwe. I can say that we all have come through and survived in 2018. We are all winners. I am proud of you. The China-Zimbabwe friendship entered a new era in 2018. The top leaders of the two countries held official talks twice. The bilateral relationship was elevated to the status of comprehensive strategic partnership of cooperation. A number of Chinese-assisted projects in Zimbabwe were completed or launched.
We also want to introduce this festival to the local Zimbabwean people because we used to spend the Chinese New Year in our small circle. The locals didn't really know our traditions. Through this form, we can let them know our Chinese festivals. This is our biggest annual festival. Let them join in to celebrate it.
And your sports news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. Big names return to the Banyana squad ahead of a friendly tie against the Netherlands.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.
South Africa's senior national women's team will face the Netherlands in an international friendly this weekend as part of their World Cup preparations. The match against the Dutch will see the return of Australian-based player Refilwe Jane, while the recently crowned African Women's Player of the Year, Thembi Gatlana, is also available for national duty. Here's CGTN's CS Du Plessis.
South Africa has enjoyed an incredible 12 months, retaining their COSAFA Cup title, finishing runners-up to Nigeria in the Cup of Nations, and in the process qualifying for their first ever World Cup. Many will argue that the hard work has only just begun for the team known as Banyana, and it starts with a clash against the Netherlands, followed by a match against Sweden.
That is why we have these games, to test ourselves, not only in games, but against the best, you know. The Netherlands are the current European champions and ranked number 7, and we've played Sweden before on more than one occasion. Played them last year at the same time. So it's going to be a real test for us, but it's good that it comes so early so we can see what we still have to work on.
The African Women's Coach of the Year is excited by the prospect of playing against the team ranked 7th in the world and maintains that there are still places up for grabs ahead of the World Cup in June.
It's up to the players, you know. They need to raise the levels all the time. They need to raise the standard all the time. And the players that do come in, that challenge them, they need to raise it as well because they select themselves. You know, we are there to select them, but their performances, their attitude and everything else, because it's a whole package.
All eyes will be on the Houston Dash player who recently walked away with the Player of the Year award. But the 23-year-old admits she isn't feeling the pressure to perform and is just concentrating on the task at hand.
It doesn't really kind of sort
change the way I am. I'm still a team player, and I have rules and responsibilities that I have to adhere to from my teammates and from the coaches.
The teams have met before when Banyana was coached by Vera Pauw, and invaluable lessons were taken from those one-sided encounters in the Netherlands. But these are the calibre of teams Ellis and her charges need to face to gauge how far they've come and how far they need to go to be ready for their debut appearance at the greatest event in football, the World Cup. CS Duplessis, CGTN, Johannesburg.
And turning to the Saudi Arabian city of Jeddah, which hosted the Italian Super Cup, where Cristiano Ronaldo's goal secured the title for Juventus after a 1-0